Hello and welcome back to Desert DIY. If you are new here, my name is Corey. Today I will be making over this old World War II era trunk into this beautiful like English country cottage trunk. But starting out, it was old and rusted and had been exposed to the elements, and the inside was pretty rough as well. But one thing that makes this trunk special is it still has this like shelf part in here, the insert. Most of these old trunks have this piece missing, this piece right here. So when I take this out, you'll see just how yucky it is inside. But the inside, it looks as though it has molded, but it is not actually mold. It is just water stains and rust stains coming through from where the nails were. So I'm just going to go ahead and take out this insert that is in there. It's like just a paper that somebody had put in there, and underneath there you can see all the staining on the original paper lining that was in there. Since it's not moldy, I can actually fix up this piece. Had this been that infested with mold, then it would definitely be a piece that just had to be thrown away. But I thought it was a really neat part of history. This particular time in history is very interesting to me, and I have a huge military family, so trunks like these are always something I want to collect and fix up. And I sprayed it all out with bleach just to make sure I killed any bacteria, and now I'm just going to vacuum out and pull out any loose pieces of that paper lining, and then I spray it with shellac. So this is like a polyurethane sort of thing, but it's made out of something different. It has some natural elements in it as well, so it is a little bit more good for the earth, although not perfect. And then this spray paint is just a white gloss enamel that stops rust. So I'm going to spray that in there first. And like I always do, I paint from the bottom up. Well, this time I'm going to paint from the inside out. So I'm going to paint the whole inside in the areas in which I'm not going to cover up. So I have a surprise for you towards the end of the video. I want to show you guys something really neat that I do on the inside of this trunk to fix it up since it was in such rough shape. But I just covered all of the rusty areas of this piece with the white spray paint, and I also covered the entire outside with the white spray paint because I don't want that green to show through behind the pieces that I'm going to be decoupaging on. So what I used to decoupage on that piece that you saw in the beginning, how it turns out at the end, I actually used napkins to do the decoupage, and I'll talk about that more when I get to that step. But for now, I want to show you how to remove the handles on an old trunk like this. I thought that I could just, like, brute strength rip these off and pry them off with a big, large screwdriver, but they were not budging, which really surprised me because these are just nails. They're not screws. So I ended up going on YouTube, of all places, of course, and found a tutorial on how to remove these, but I didn't have the right tools that the guy had in the video, so then I just used what I had and just was creative, I guess. You can see how I was doing it. I'm just prying it off as far as I can and then pulling it off with pliers towards the end. And it did take me quite a bit of wrist strength, which is hard for me to do because I have carpal tunnel. But this middle part you can bend and then take off with a hammer, and then the bottom part do the same thing, then turn it upside down and get that last screw off. Now for the decoupage part. These fancy napkins I ordered off of Amazon, but they come in layers. This is the most important part of this decoupage. So you have to split these napkins into the final layer, like the only layer that has the design on it. That's the part that you're going to use for the decoupage. And the one I'm going to use for the top part is this neat kind of like a toile, and it has birds all over it. So you just center it first on your piece. If you're going to do like a large piece, you always start from the center and work your way out so that your pattern doesn't look weird. But I just used Mod Podge in a matte finish. The finish part doesn't matter because of the way I'm doing it. So since I'm not going to be using Mod Podge as the finish on top of the napkins, the finish style like matte, gloss, whatever, it doesn't really matter for this particular application. So I just put on a light layer. You don't want it to be really thick or else it'll start tearing away the napkin since it is so thin. So I just brush it on with a regular paintbrush, and then I'm going to put the napkin on and center it the best I can. Now, let me tell you, don't beat yourself up if you don't get it on centered your first try. I don't think that's even possible unless you're like a decoupage robot that does nothing wrong. But it does take a little while to line it up and lay it out perfectly straight. And since this particular napkin design had a lot of white in the background, I did not worry about covering the entire surface here. So you see there's a little bit of a gap towards the edge. It doesn't mess up how it's going to look in the end. Now, as you're laying this napkin down, you're going to just very lightly flatten it with I used a microfiber rag because it's not going to leave any lint behind. So you can use a sponge also. Sponges work for this. And then as I was laying it out, kind of like wallpaper in a way, I barely touched it with my hand. You have to be very careful because you can very easily rip this thin, super thin napkin. So that's where the rag comes in handy because it's much more gentle at like smoothing the surface without tearing it. And then the next thing that I learned just from trial and error was to pat the napkin instead of wiping it to get the air bubbles out. If you pat it down with a lot of pressure, just straight down, not moving it side to side, you can get all the air bubbles out because the napkin itself is breathable, so the air bubbles just come out that way. It really worked. I couldn't believe how simple that was, and I just found that through experimenting. But once I get all of the bubbles out, you can kind of see some here in this shot. I just leave it as is and let it dry completely. I don't put on another layer of the Mod Podge. And then the next pieces that I line up, you have to line them up in a different direction for a pattern like this. So I did mine upside down. And I also used my paintbrush and the Mod Podge to flatten the edge of the previous piece. And I did the same technique where I just blotted it with the microfiber cloth. Now for the side, this is where you have to use a little bit different application method. So since I do have to cover all the way across, I did end up having to cut another sliver to finish this piece here in that whole pattern. But I just laid the whole piece down and then went back and cut the extra off after this piece was dry, which I did not show that part because it was extremely time consuming. Now here's the surprise for the inside of the trunk. I went and got some Cedar closet liners. So these old trunks I want to use to hold my old military uniforms. So I want to make sure that bugs like moths and whatnot don't get in there. And Cedar is the best for preventing your old things that you want to save from getting bugs. And when I measured it, it was 31 inches inside. But something you need to remember is that these trunks are not going to be perfectly straight on all their edges. So I took off a 1/16 of an inch from each side on the measurement, which makes it to where it was just 2/16 under 31 inches. This gave me a little bit of wiggle room to play with, just like because I was saying, you know, they're not really perfectly straight inside these old trunks. So now I'm going to just do a dry fit and make sure that I measured it all out correctly. It fit perfectly with just a tiny bit extra in there, which is what I wanted. And these pieces I'm actually going to use on the bottom first. As I was playing around with the configuration, I realized that I needed to do the bottom before I did the sides. The glue that I used to put the pieces in the bottom was just E6000. This is a really good multi-purpose super glue. And it takes a really long time to dry, but since these are going just on the bottom, I don't need to worry about them moving or anything like that, so it can just set and dry overnight without any problems. So now I'm just going to go ahead and place it inside the trunk and lay it flat along the bottom. The reason why I'm leaving those two side pieces of wood in there is because I want to put that tray back in here eventually after I fix it up. I don't fix up the tray in this video because I still don't really know what I want to do with it to make it special, but you'll still get to see a really good after of the inside of this trunk. So now I'm just lining these up, and they have tongue and groove on them, but the thin, tiny boards like these, the tongue and groove is really difficult to put together, and a lot of times these boards are twisted and warped a little bit, just enough to where you can't get the tongue and groove together. So I just did not worry about that part. And then that last piece that was left over was so skinny that it would have been really difficult to cut a piece like that. So I just slid all the boards together into a centered position on the bottom, and that left a perfect little gap for me to slide the side pieces down. And for these side pieces, I ended up having to use a special glue trick, which many YouTube channels have used, and I also use. But I use the E6000 first, and then I go back with a hot glue gun. You were probably wondering why I had a hot glue gun out earlier. But this is what it is for. So I put the E6000 down first, and then I go back with the hot glue gun and place big globs of hot glue. So then you have one glue that sets quickly and one glue that sets strongly. The one you really need is that strong glue, but the quick set glue, which is the hot glue, helps the piece stay in place while the strong glue dries and cures overnight. So now when I put these in, they will stick right to the side, since this tongue and groove function of the wood is not working for this application. Now the lid. The lid, I'm just going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to line these up, lay them out, and then let it dry overnight. And you can kind of tell on the left-hand side that this second piece is pretty warped. And now you can see what I mean. It lays flat, but it just won't fit into the tongue and groove. It was such a pain to try and get that tongue and groove. So just laying them side by side worked perfectly well, and it still looks amazing. As you can see, it looks as though they are inside each other's tongue and groove, even though they're not. Now, there is one final step that I have to do on this piece in order for the piece to be finished, and that is put on a coat of polyurethane to protect my napkin decoupage finish. So now you can kind of see all the different patterns that I used for the napkins, and they were all from Amazon. So I just went over the whole entire piece with some clear semi-gloss polyurethane, and this is how it all turned out. And that polyurethane makes it very durable and almost completely water resistant on the outside. So this trunk will protect my uniforms and other memories for many years to come, and it's found a new life in my home. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have not yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Bye!